Did you know that your emergency fund could be hurting you? No, seriously, it might be hurting your wealth. So that's why you need to watch this video, and you need to stay to the end of the video because I'm gonna give you an alternative to your emergency fund that you could get started with setting up today. So really quickly, how is your emergency fund hurting you, or how possibly could it be hurting you? Well, the way that it could be hurting you is that having a large amount of money sitting in cash is not doing anything for you. So that means that you're giving up a lot of opportunity cost of what that money could become. So let's say, for example, that you have a relatively small emergency fund of $20,000. So if you have $20,000, that might be 6 months of spending, which is kind of like common advice. But did you know that that $20,000 sitting in your bank account that's not really making any money for you, that could actually turn out to be a lot of money down the line, especially if we're talking about a really long time period. If that money was invested instead over 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, depending on what age you are. You know, if you're 20 years old and you have $20,000 sitting in cash and you have that sitting in there until you're 60 years old, that's 40 years of lost opportunity. Not only that, but as we all know, money that's just sitting in there, not earning anything, it is being eaten away by inflation. Inflation is having like a little meal, a little lunchtime meal on your money. So it's becoming worth less and less and less as your purchasing power goes down. And even so, like right now, it's so important because at least as I make this video, it's 2021 and inflation has been 3, almost 4 times as much as what we're used to. And so we're seeing money just become worth less and less and less really, really quickly. And so that's why your emergency fund could be hurting you. But now that we've got that over with, let's see how you can instead still set yourself up for success, still have something ready for you in an actual emergency so you have access to some kind of cash, some kind of cash flow, but in this case, we don't want to have our money just sitting there in cash and just wasting away to opportunity and wasting away to inflation. For our first solution, I'm going to be talking directly to those of you out there that are going for financial independence, that are going for early retirement like I kind of currently am living. So, well, if you are going for financial independence, that probably means that you're saving a lot of your income. Possibly, like the general rule is about 50% of your income. You know, if you're bringing in 100K per year and you're only spending 50K and you're putting 50K away for your investments, then you have a 50% savings rate, right? So that is not uncommon. And what you could do instead of having a large cash reserve is to simply just use that existing savings rate. If you're saving $50,000 per year, how much is that per month? I don't know. I can't do the math right now off my head. But if you were to, instead of putting that money into your investments, just use it for the emergency that occurred, you would have some cash flow that goes to that emergency. Now, the ultimate emergency of losing your job is not going to satisfy this requirement, but for many other emergencies that generally what an emergency fund is for, like your car breaking down and needing a major repair, your house needing a major repair, maybe you get a large hospital bill or something like that, you could just put that extra savings rate towards your expenses. Just put it towards that emergency. Most of the time, the emergency is not going to be due all at once. You're usually not going to get the $20,000 bill due on day one. You're usually going to have time in order to pay it off. And so you can simply just use your existing savings rate to pay that off. And, you know, and put off a little bit of putting into your investments and instead paying off this emergency. That is solution number 1. And I really wish that I had known about this sooner. Now, I did lots of things right when I was young. Okay, I'm still kind of young, but when I was really young, like when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, and I was, you know, getting interested in financial independence, I'm so thankful that I got into it early. But I had so much money sitting in cash, just wasting away, just not doing nothing for me, especially at my age. I was in the military. I had probably one of the most stable jobs that you could ever get, unless you're what we call I'm not going to use the word, but you know, as long as you're doing good in your job, you're not going to get kicked out. I had probably one of the most secure jobs, and I had a bunch of money sitting in cash, relative to me anyway. So I had like $20,000 sitting in cash. That was a waste of money. That was wasting away to inflation. Luckily, inflation was low back then. That was wasting away for opportunity cost. Now, looking back at it, almost 10 years ago, if I would, you know, that money, how much would that be worth now? As we've seen, we've had an incredible bull market. The market has just been shooting straight up into the sky, reaching for the moon, reaching to the stars, things like that. And so even a seemingly small amount of $20,000 back then that I had in cash, it would be worth a lot more for me now. Luckily today I do know about that, and I have found out about that, and so I have much less money in cash than I used to. And you should maybe consider doing the same. Let's move on to number 2. And number 2, a solution alternative to your emergency fund, is to simply use a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. So if you are a homeowner, which thankfully I have recently become one, I paid cash for a really low cost housing in a low cost state, in a low cost area, and so I got a house for $110,000. And I got in, I guess I got in at the right time, because now it's shot up to $130,000, which isn't really a lot for a house compared to like the high cost living area where I came from in Southern California. But it's relative to that, that's an additional $20,000. You divide 20,000 by 110, that's how much it went up in price, right? So it's gone up in value a lot. So I'm thankfully that I basically saved $20,000 by purchasing it earlier rather than right now with the crazy inflation that's going on. Long story short, it's already been long. I don't like it when people say long story short, but I just did. Basically, what you can do with a HELOC is, if you have equity in your home, so right now I have all the equity in my home, you could take out a home equity line of credit, which is basically what you can borrow from the bank based on the equity in your home, up to a certain percentage. And the rate is usually going to be variable, I believe, so it can fluctuate with the federal rates. Right now, interest rates are unbelievably low. They're basically giving you away free money. But just remember, nothing in life is free. There ain't nothing in this world for free, as that song that I used to listen to goes. But this does present an opportunity. So a HELOC could be used to help with any kind of crazy cash discrepancies, any kind of cash flow discrepancy. So when you're on cash flow, so your cash flow, what you need to do is you can even out your cash flow by borrowing against the equity in your home. So if you have $50,000 of equity in your home at least, and you have a home equity line of credit of, let's say, $40,000, that could be potentially up to $40,000 that you can borrow and use for your emergency and then pay it off over time. And usually the interest rates with HELOCs are gonna be relatively low, especially because they're tied to the federal interest rate. So right now they're supposed to be really, really low. But basically you can just even out that cash flow and pay for that emergency over time. Going back to if you already have a high savings rate, you can instead pay it off over time rather than having it due all at once. Rather than having that $20,000 emergency all due at once, you can spread that out over, a year, over 2 years, whatever that you need to do where you can feel comfortable with paying off that emergency. Next up at number 3, things are going to get a little bit more crazy, but this can actually work out really great for you, depending on the circumstance, depending on your situation. And that is just utilizing credit cards with specific opportunities where they offer you very, very low APR for a certain amount of time, sometimes even 0% APR. So basically what happens is that you can put a large amount of money onto a credit card, you can put a balance on this credit card, and you can get 0% payments or very, very low percent payments on that credit card for the first introductory period. Usually it's at least 12 months. I've seen 15 months before. So up to 15 months, you can potentially get free money for 15 months. So if you have an emergency and you have good credit and you get a new credit card with an introductory APR of 0% for 15 months, you can put an emergency on there. Let's say it's $20,000, and you can pay off $20,000 of an emergency over 15 months at 0% interest. Free money for 15 months. I've actually personally had a success story with this with someone in my family where I've introduced that concept to them. I said, hey, it wasn't really with an emergency, but it was with existing credit card debt. I'm like, if you're serious about paying off this credit card debt, let's go and open up a new credit card with 0% APR. You put away those other credit cards. We're gonna transfer the balance onto this card, and you are gonna pay it off in 15 months, not paying any interest. So before they were paying, 15, 20% interest, I think 20% interest easily. And now I got them paying 0% interest, and they paid it off in time within that 15 months, and it all worked out. It was a good success story. And that could also potentially be something for you as well. You could utilize a new credit card with 0% APR to basically smooth out the ride of any kind of emergency that you might be facing. And then we have number 4. And number 4 is, like we talked about, you're borrowing money. But in this case, number 4 on this list is to use margin. Okay, margin is basically borrowing against your existing investments. More typically, what it's going to mean is that you have money invested with a brokerage company in a regular brokerage account, like a taxable investment account. Okay, if you have enough money in there, then typically you can just borrow on margin. Now, what it's traditionally used for is just to invest more money, but using leverage, right? Invest more using leverage, and that's kind of risky, right? But theoretically, you don't actually have to use your margin. You don't have to borrow money and use it for more investing. You can use it for an emergency. And right now, margin rates are crazy low because they're tied to the federal rate as well. So they are variable, but they could help smooth the ride. So me, for example, I do have a good amount of money in a regular taxable account for various reasons throughout my life. That's a pretty unique circumstance that I had to have a lot of money in a taxable account. By doing that, I actually have access to a good amount of margin. So let's say, for example, typically, just it's going to depend on the company, but if you can borrow up to like say 30% of how much you have invested, so if you have $100,000 invested in a taxable brokerage account with a certain company, then you can borrow up to $30,000. Now there are plenty of risks that go along with borrowing money against your investments, and so you're not going to want to borrow that maximum in most circumstances. Do your own research on this, but let's say, for example, you want to keep a really safe margin rate, a borrowing rate. Let's say it's that safe rate, you determine that to be 10%. So if you have $200,000 invested and you can borrow on margin just 10% of that, that's going to be $20,000. So boom, there you have $20,000 of access for a line of credit that you can borrow some money for some short-term emergencies and then pay it off over time. Another great thing about margin loans is typically that you're only going to be paying the actual interest. Technically, it's only due. Now, of course, you're going to want to pay down the principal because then you're going to pay less interest over time by paying down the principal. But theoretically, only the interest is actually going to be due, and you can, actually have that debt for like perpetuity forever. But that's how it works. You can just use that money for the emergency. You can smooth the ride of your cash flow, and you can pay it off over time. Right now, currently, that is a big reason why I personally switched to M1 Finance. So I used to have most of my investments at Fidelity Investments, but their margin rates were like 8% for me. So 8%, I don't want to borrow money at 8%. So I've been hearing lots of great things about M1 Finance. And so I did all my research on it, and I finally, pulled the trigger, as they say, and I went to M1 Finance and I rolled a lot of money over into M1 Finance. And now I have a pretty significant amount that I can borrow on margin at M1 Finance. And right now you can get margin rates at 2% at M1 Finance. Now that is going to be subject to change with the federal funds rate. It's going to change. It can be a variable interest rate, but right now, at least as I make that video, I could theoretically borrow at 2% if I have an emergency. And therefore, I don't need a large emergency fund. I don't need to have a lot of my money sitting on the sidelines in cash. And this is something that you could also do for yourself. So really, take the time and think about this and do some more research on it and see, do you have a lot of money sitting in cash that is actually worthless? And can you use one of these alternatives? So one of the alternatives that you could use is M1 Finance. And I do have a link to that. So basically I can refer you over, and possibly me and you could both get a bonus. So we can both benefit from this if you deposit, I think it's like $500 into one of their accounts. Right now, I think it's like a $30 bonus. So just check out the link. I'm gonna put it in the description below, and I'm also gonna put it in a pinned comment below. Or you can go to oncashflow.com/resources, and you can check out M1 Finance on that page. Just click through there. You can see that I would refer you over, and if you do decide to open up an account, you could get a small little bonus for yourself, and I will get the same small bonus for myself. And then if you do want to consider using margin as a way to buffer for emergencies, that could be a possibility as well. So definitely consider it. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Zach from oncashflow.com, and I hope to see you next time.